So here we are to talk about some dry things. Now I do dry things, but I also do this. It gives you a look. And that's what I'm chasing. I am chasing the look. Pretty cool, isn't it? So this channel is a little bit of everything. Let's dive into the numbers because they're cool too. I'm a bit of a numbers nerd. All right. And if you're not a numbers nerd and this is not for you, I'll see you in the next one. G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you. I do hope that you are super well. Well, I hope you've seen my 85mm 1.2 first look opus. Yes, it's been a super well received video. It's cruising along. Check it out if you haven't seen it. Here's a link to it right here. That lens, what Nikon is doing, what Nikon's been doing for, well, probably the last 4 or 5 years. It's only we, the general public, it's only us that are starting to see the fruits of all of that labour now. This is why we've got this great news to deliver today. And that is about profits, profits, and more profits. Nikon has released their third quarter results ending 31st of December 2022, and well, they're pretty awesome. Profits are up, revenue is fantastic, it's over $1 billion US. Let's talk more about what's going on for Nikon, and they do share with us some of why this is happening for them. The imaging products units turnover from the previous year, it's gone from 136 billion yen out to 184 billion yen, with the operating profit going from 18.8 to 41.2 billion yen. Now that is an operating profit for the imaging unit of over 300 million US. Now, I would ask everybody to just cast their minds back. Just over 3 years ago, I made a video talking about the fact that there were certain corners of the internet out there saying Nikon was bankrupt, would be bankrupt, might be bankrupt soon, so on. And for me, this was a preposterous statement because this was all based on the concept of 1 or 2 products that didn't quite work out and the fact that there was a few quarters that were not profitable. But there is so much to business. There is so much to large business. There are so many mechanisms by which businesses can restructure. Restructuring can happen in all sorts of directions. And ultimately, what restructuring is about is lowering your cost base so it gets below your income base, and thus you're in profit again. Now, for big businesses, businesses that have been running for decades and decades, this is not something that happens overnight. It's strategic. A company has to realise they've got to change course, they've got to come up with the plans, and in the case of a company like Nikon, they've actually got to close factories, move manufacturing, restructure their global workforce. There are all sorts of moves and machinations that require a multi-billion-dollar company to do in order to restructure. Now, this was always going to happen. And we know that this was always going to happen because Nikon is not the only company by far that has had to restructure. We all know that the digital photographic consumer world has changed immensely over the last decade. Every single company out there that's been involved longer than that in this space has had to restructure. Companies like Canon and Nikon, they will have had to have done absolutely major work under the bonnet that us normal consumers wouldn't really see, have no idea that it's going on, to restructure to the new world we live in. We're not selling tens of millions of cameras every year. We're selling single digits, and at the moment it might be 4 or 5 million cameras per year. The industry changed, businesses have to restructure, restructuring takes years. I'm just super excited in this video that 3 years ago I said, I don't get it. This is just normal. The world has changed. Nikon has to restructure. They're the smallest of all the companies that people are scrutinizing, Canon, Sony, etc. Those other companies are enormous. Canon, we know, are a massive company, whether it's photocopiers or their cinema line of cameras and everything else in between. Enormous. And Sony even bigger again, having record labels, movie studios, and a gaming division. The way that they need to and what they need to do to restructure and how they might be exposed when the entire photographic industry shrinks is going to be completely different. And it's logical. The smaller the company and the larger their stake in a certain industry, the more obvious their exposure will be. So this story unfolding for me 3 or 4 years ago, it was really obvious. It was really clear what was going on and there was no drama here. Well, and there wasn't. There was no drama. This is just business operations, businesses operating, getting things done. 3 years later, since I made this video here, maybe check it out. It's a bit raw. My production values were a bit different, but this is where I talked about the notion that companies like this, they're super tankers, and it takes a while for them to turn things around. You can't just do it like that. And if you're comparing Nikon to, say, Sony and Canon, well, Sony and Canon, they can basically, one, the photography divisions are a much smaller part of their overall business, which in turn makes it easier for them to not really show what's going on in these divisions because it doesn't impact the company as a whole as much. But that aside, it doesn't change a company's capacity to restructure. Fast forward 3 years, here we are today. Nikon's profits are growing. And from my perspective, technologically, right now, right as of today, they have the best products in the market from a technology perspective. Now, of course, let's not jump into the mid-tier is not there. Nikon's a one-camera company, the Z9, blah, blah. Blah, blah. Like it is blah, blah. Nikon is not going to stop at the Z9 and that's the end. Nothing else is going to happen. We all know more cameras will come and thus the lower tiers below the Z9 will begin to be filled out. And what's so exciting about this is it's super clear that everything below the Z9 is what's going to come next. I mean, it's just like what was happening 3 years ago. It's very obvious to see how this will play out. Well, it's very obvious to see what Nikon will do next here. They will deliver lower-end cameras. It might take 3, 6, 12, 18 months to flesh out everything that everyone might want to see being fleshed out. Look, it might take longer, but it will happen. They are making great profits. So you've paid for everything you need to pay for, and this is profit that we can choose to do what we want to do with. And I'd like to just stick a pin in that for a second, and I'd like to just jump to a sidebar for a second. You might ask the question, why did I think that Nikon would turn their supertanker around? And it's super simple. Firstly, this is very normal for businesses. All sorts of businesses can run for 20 years, 50 years. They have a bad year, they have to restructure, and they move on. It's just standard, and especially for businesses that have been around for so long. We've all got to change directions, we've all got to move with the trends, and you can't necessarily do that in a day. It might take a month, a year, or a couple of years. So it's just normal in big business. But secondly, Nikon have done this before. The Nikon D3 moment, which I've talked about before, was an example of exactly this story. I had an understanding of Nikon's DNA and the fact that they had the capacity to bring out best in class. And the way that they can bring out best in class is they take their time to get it right. And we all know this. If you want to do something the best, if you want it to be the highest quality, if you want it to reach into the corners of usefulness, technology, thoughtfulness, you've got to put some time into it. You can't just push that stuff out quickly. And the Nikon D3 was absolutely an example of this. For years, we waited for Nikon to get into the full frame space. Canon had done it, but when they did, they brought us the most photographic, the highest dynamic range, and the best ISO performance DSLR that existed. And really, from an industry perspective, that camera and that technology was never really superseded by anybody else. Nikon continued to hold on to the mantle of high ISO performance, dynamic range performance from that moment on, and it still exists today. Nikon still sit in that space. Yes, maybe some other companies are up there with them now, but they are still at the top. So I knew being a Nikon person, owning a Nikon D2X, an APS-C flagship camera, and waiting for the full-frame 35mm camera to arrive, from seeing Nikon's DNA, seeing their grit, and seeing how they went about entering into the full-frame DSLR market, they took their time and then they brought us best in class that still stands the test of time. That thought, that DNA, that technology, that approach still stands the test of time today. And it did across their cameras. We saw it again and again, whether it's the D3, the D4, the D800, the D810, the D500, the D5, or the D850. This was Nikon always giving us best in class for that category. And I just felt, based on all of that evidence, that we were going to get best in class when they delivered their flagship. And it would happen. And we just had to wait. And here today, we are talking about directly the response to waiting, that DNA, and the outcome from that waiting and that DNA. And that is Nikon's growing numbers, growing revenue. And Nikon inform us that this increased revenue is largely in part to this very device here, the Nikon Z9, which of course we all know without a shadow of a doubt is an extraordinary camera. And I'm not talking, this is not a conversation about what camera is next and where's more Expeed 7 and Nikon is a Z9 company only and doesn't care about anyone else. That is not the point of this. And those statements are not true. We live in a time continuum. Not all products can come out on the same day, and it is logical to release the hardback edition of your book first, so early adopters pay the higher price, and then you release the paperback version of your book. That is how the publishing world has worked for years. Electronics companies do it. This is normal behavior. Now, Nikon do it differently to Sony, that do it differently to Canon, and that's okay. If you like the way those other companies do things better, then you can go for it, and that's totally fine. I don't mind. Nobody really minds. But to suggest, one, that Nikon had no future, well, you didn't really know much about anything. And two, to suggest that Nikon is a Z9 company only, well, I'm sorry, this sounds disrespectful, but you also don't know much about anything. Of course, more cameras are coming. Of course, we've seen this all before. And it's also logical. Just straight up logic says to us, there will be more cameras than the Z9 that have an Expeed 7 chip in them. It's going to happen. In this report, we also hear that the constraints around semiconductors are easing, and we've also heard the fact that the exchange rates with the yen has helped with profits. It's fantastic to see all these different things are affecting Nikon's success, their profitability, and their ability to move forwards. Yes, the Z9 has been super popular. A lot of people have purchased it, and I am quite confident that we will have more cameras coming soon. Now, I've had a thought while I'm recording this. It's been such a good growth year, their financial year, the one we're currently in, that ends. This year ends, their financial year ends March 31st, okay? So, my thinking is any new awesome camera that's going to come next is probably going to start shipping in the next financial year, right? Because it makes the next financial year look spectacular. And companies have to care about this stuff. And why do they have to care about this stuff? Because people who don't really know what they're really talking about will latch onto the fact if you have one really big year and one smaller year. So they have to be thoughtful and put these products across separate years so each year can look fantastic. So my theory is whatever's coming next, whatever body, we might hear about it earlier, who knows, and it'll be in the next financial year, and it will make that next financial year look spectacular. And something that's interesting for me is we can see that camera sales this quarter, the one we're talking about last year, was 160,000 units. It's gone up to 210,000 camera units. So that is a significant jump, and it's hard to know whether that's all Z9s. But if that is all Z9s, that is a lot of Z9s, because we're talking, what is that, 160 to 210. So we're talking about 50,000 extra cameras. Some of those are going to be the Z30, but this really does give us a strong indicator of how successful the Z9 has been. I think it does. Of course, Nikon continue to sell Z6s and Z7s and everything else, but that's that base below 160. Why do we go from 160,000 to 210,000? And my guess is a lot of that's the Z9, and that's just in one quarter. I don't know. It's going to be some component of that number, but the Z9 has been super successful. And imagine something similar to a Z9 that comes out soon and is cheaper than a Z9. It's just going to go crazy. So I'm expecting this time next year, we're going to see even bigger growth from Nikon. One thing that is interesting to see in this data, that lens sales for the quarter have gone from 360,000 to 320,000. Now, that kind of makes sense to me because Nikon last year, as we know, released a lot of huge, expensive lenses. In this country, $24,000 and $25,000 lenses. What could be hidden in this data is they're selling less lenses, but they are making way more money out of selling those lenses than they are selling, say, a $400 lens, which of course they are making way more money. So don't worry too much about the fact that the lenses are down by 40,000 units across 300 odd thousand. It's only about 10% or so, give or take. And as I said, last year, they would have sold a lot of 400 2.8s, a lot of 600s, a lot of 800 PFs, a lot of 400 4.5s. This time a year ago, none of those super telephoto expensive Z lenses existed. And this year, all of them existed, and all of them are probably shipping in some way or another on shelves, ticking over. The number of lenses is down, but the money they make from those number of lenses may be way more. Well, they are way more. So everybody, look, this is great news for Nikon. This is great news for those who are Nikon consumers who are looking forward to new products, more development of lenses and cameras. There's absolutely zero reason why that won't continue to happen. Please do let me know your thoughts in the comments below about all of this. How excited are you feeling about 2023 for Nikon? Certainly their capacity to manufacture is increasing, and with money in the bank, profits, cash at hand, they can certainly continue to flourish. It's been so good to see you. If this is your first time here, I would love to see you again, so please do subscribe. Please share this video. Please like this video, and I look forward to seeing you very soon. Bye for now.